Let's have a look at state politics. On the line is Andy Meddick, who is the state MP for the Western Victoria region. Andy, good morning. Thanks for being with us.
Good morning, Mitchell. How are you?
Good, thank you. So I believe Parliament and the Legislative Council is back tomorrow sitting.
Correct.
And what's on the agenda?
There are a few things on the agenda this week. We have the controversial North East Link bill coming, which will provide for the establishment of the tolling corporation for the North East Link freeway project, tollway project, and also for the funding and the building and awarding of contracts. All the legal ins and outs that are needed to set that particular project in train. That's probably the biggest one, but there are also a couple of other bills coming. One that will be of particular interest to our constituency and everywhere down in the Geelong and Greater area is what's known as the GOREP legislation, the Greater Ocean Road and Environments bill, a series of two bills that will be coming perhaps on Thursday. It's currently fourth on the notice paper, and I will be bringing amendments to that bill. What it essentially does is it combines a number of the coastal committees that have existed over the years without and assumes authority over the whole of the Great Ocean Road coastal area. Essentially, on the briefing paper, it's to minimise duplication of authorities and to greater protect the areas from inappropriate development and other types of things, overuse on tourism and that sort of stuff, which might have a detrimental effect to the environment. However, the amendments that I'll be bringing in particular surround Bells Beach Surfing Reserve. It has a history of mismanagement and at times inappropriate infrastructure or infrastructure that's been let go, and it has been threatened at different times by inappropriate development in the form of either tourism developments or accommodation developments. And whilst there is a very good committee which reports to the Surf Coast Shire as the planning authority, there are many, and I mean a great many people on the Surf Coast who are long-term residents of the Surf Coast, but also there's a great international interest in having a separate committee of management that will run the Bells Beach Reserve and report directly to the authority, so that the area is protected in its entirety, and to also have a look at a far better and far deeper investigation into First Nations presence in the area. We know that there are shell middens there. We know that there are areas that are actually fenced off because of earlier investigations that show that the people that lived in that area. But there is information that's sort of coming anecdotally to me that means that it could warrant a far greater investigation of that. And we may well find a hell of a lot more, and that would mean that the steps to protect the area would need to be far greater, and that's what this committee would do that I'm suggesting. What
sort of feedback have you had from the government and the opposition about your amendments?
I've had them go backwards and forwards with the Environment Department and the Minister for a very long time, and the government is being very coy. They're playing their cards very close to their chest, as they always do, and I may not know what the result of that is and how successful I've been in negotiating that through until we actually have the bill before us that morning. So I may not find out until as late as Thursday morning how successful I've been on that. But certainly in preliminary discussions that I've had with other members of the crossbench, they recognise that that Bells Beach, apart from the rest of the coastal area and all the coast, is magnificent and deserves the best protection we can give it. But Bells Beach has a significant place in the history of Australia in the surfing context. It's been responsible for the spawning of the entire surf industry in Australia. It is recognised around the world as the birthplace of surfing and surfing competitions. It is the oldest surfing competition in the world. It is unique in that respect, and it's held as unique by the entire world surfing community, and so it has an international focus. So it deserves a far greater level of protection.
And in terms of the toll road legislation, what principles guide your decision-making there, given that probably most people in Western Victoria won't drive on the North East Link?
No, and look, toll roads in the past, and it's certainly been the decisions of governments of all flavours. It doesn't matter whether you are a fan of Labor governments or of Liberal governments. We've tended to send tolls off onto private enterprise, such as through CityLink, Transurban. This legislation actually sets up the state government as being the tolling authority, so that the monies will actually go into state government coffers, which I think is only a good thing, particularly given the amount of money that all governments around Australia, all state governments, all federal governments have had to, release a hell of a lot of money and to borrow more money in order to get through the current COVID-19 crisis. So anything that will pour money back into the state coffers can only be a bonus, because it'll mitigate to some extent those borrowings.
Anything the thing that I think of toll roads is just make sure that you cross the T's and dot the I's. That's, I think, something we've perhaps learnt from Transurban and that particular deal.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Moving right along, the brumbies issue. This is something we've tried to cover a bit on the program, and we've tried to speak to both sides of the issue. I guess the question is, what should we do there? On one hand, you've got the cruelty aspect and the humane treatment of those brumbies. On the other hand, evidently they're quite environmentally destructive.
Oh, that's absolutely true. Look, I tend to, with all of these sorts of matters, I tend to fall back to the science, to the research that's been done. And there's no doubt that any large, heavy animal that is in these particular areas, and we have to remember a great deal of these areas have very significant and very fragile environments, and they're easily destroyed. And the brumbies are not alone in that. They've not been. I think there's a narrative that's been run by some that the brumbies are the only animal that's contributing to this environmental degradation, and they are not. In fact, it seems apparent that for every brumby, there are around 300 deer or pigs, which also do a tremendous amount of damage in these areas. But all of these animals are invasive species to that area. They are not native. And my position is that we need to, above all else, protect those native species and those environments. The brumbies, just like the cattle before them, are an invasive species, but that does not give us the right to arbitrarily kill them. We put these animals there, and we have a responsibility to look after their lives. It's not their fault that they're there. It is ours. So it's my position and the party's position that these animals be humanely trapped, that they be removed and rehomed. Now, I know that can be an expensive process, but there are an awful lot of people out there who are very passionate about this issue, who are willing to give up large tracts of their own land in order to rehome these animals. We owe it to those animals to save their lives, to not kill them. And I will never support a position of just arbitrarily going into these parks and shooting them. We have a greater responsibility to these animals, and we have a greater responsibility to those environmental areas.
What is the rehoming process like? Because I've heard from people up there that have experience with the brumbies that they're quite hard to deal with. They're not like tame horses, if you can ever use that term.
Well, there are different schools of thought on that, and some people will say that yes, they are difficult, and some will say not. It depends on how much experience, I suppose, you have in that particular area. But it doesn't matter when we're considering the breadth of the problem and the alternative, which is intensely cruel. I don't care if you are a sharpshooter going from a helicopter. I don't care if you're a sharpshooter who's working on the ground. They are a large animal, and to shoot them, you are not going to bring them down with a single shot. They are not going to die instantly. All the anecdotal evidence that I've heard, and from the brumby people up there, is that this is not the way to go. Right? So we have, as I say, this greater responsibility, and it doesn't matter if it's hard. It doesn't matter if it costs money. We owe it to them. We have to, we should be learning. And this is the thing, we don't learn from the lessons of the cane toad experience in Queensland. We mess with these environments at our own peril. And when we stuff it up, we have a responsibility to fix it in the best possible manner with world's best practice. And shooting these animals is not world's best practice.
So what happens from here with this issue? Because it does seem to have attracted quite an interest from what I can see on social media and online petitions, but also it seems to perhaps be a rare issue where you and Bev MacArthur agree.
Well, absolutely. And look, and we can, and Ms MacArthur and I can disagree about what should be done with them in terms of, I'm unsure of her position on this. It may well be that she is in that cadre of people who wish for the animals to remain in the high country, because I also know that Ms MacArthur is a proponent of returning the cattle to the high country.
Yes.
But they were removed from that because of exactly the same reason. They were determined, all the science proved that those cattle were harming the environment out there, and that's why the government made the move to remove them. This is another step along the way. But I also, Mitch, I hope that the government doesn't stop there. I hope that they make the moves to remove the deer and the pigs as well. Let's do the right thing. If we're going to have a policy of removing animals that are detrimental to that environment, then let's not make this a speciesist issue. Let's make sure we do the right thing all the way around. But you're right, on this issue, I think Ms MacArthur and I can at least agree on that one point, that the killing of these animals is not on.
Belton Road, on one hand, you've got the state opposition saying they'll pull us out of this Belton Road MOU, and on the other hand, the government saying, through the MPs that came on the program last week, Christine Cousins and Darren Cheeseman, essentially nothing to worry about, we need this investment.
Well, look, we certainly do need investment, and it would be somewhat naive of anybody to expect that in the very early stages at least, and probably the later stages of post-COVID-19, that investment is going to come from within the country. We are going to need investment from many outsiders. We're going to need not just China, but we're going to need the US, we're going to need Great Britain, we're going to need investment from a whole host of other countries around the world to lift our economy back up to where we want it to be again. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't have a certain level of scrutiny. And it's okay to make sweeping statements and say nothing to see here. That's fine. And there may well not be. And if there's not, well, then let's see the details. I'm of the opinion, but we always have, this is something that we always have, and there's a particular thing in foreign investment. It doesn't matter whether it's at a state level or at a federal level, and again, it doesn't matter what flavour government is in. There is always this niggly little thing that always sits there where foreign investment is concerned, and that's called commercial incompetence. Well, I'm sorry, but if you are an outside country looking to invest in Australia, then everything that you are trying to propose, everything that you want from government, from the taxpayer, should be laid bare. And everything that you intend to do should be laid bare. The community should expect that level of scrutiny and that level of transparency.
And just to finish up with Bell Purstill, I saw that you wrote quite a lengthy letter to the editor in the Geelong Advertiser on this subject. You're saying that it should be renamed.
Absolutely, absolutely. Look, we have, and I know some will be quite critical of this particular thing. It is going to be divisive, and I fully accept that. Some will say that I'm putting forward a black armband view of history. Well, the fact is that this country was invaded. There was a population of people. There was a living here all across the country. And there are enormous number of stories. There was enormous hurt and pain done to our First Nations people. There were massacres. There was genocide. There were all sorts of terrible things that went on. And these places where all these things happened, they all had names. Our First Nations people had names for all these areas, and they should be returned. If we're talking about treaty, and I take my hat off to the Victorian government here in initiating treaty with our First Nations people, but if we are really going to have a meaningful treaty, well then let's pay homage to the names of these places. They had names before we came here. Let's return those names and show that respect, at least in some way.
Andy, thank you very much for your time this morning. I'll speak to you again next month.
My pleasure, Mitch, and stay well.
Thank you. I mean, a whole interview we didn't even talk about coronavirus. Isn't that refreshing?
Oh, thank God.
Good on you, mate. Thank you. Andy Meddick there, MP for the Animal Justice Party, representing Western Victoria.